We've now got our text input visible and some necessary props on there, so let's figure out how we can actually read some text out of there and print it back up on the screen inside of our text screen element. Now before we do that, we need to understand a little bit better how to handle text inputs with state in React. So this is where things are going to get just a little bit weird. It's going to get a little bit unexpected just because, well, let me show you something. Right now, I can select that text input, I can write some text in there, and everything is fine, right? I see text appear. So it appears right now that out of the box, the text input is a-okay and nothing about it needs to change. And I think you would agree with me in that regard. It appears that our application right now is more or less working just fine. But it turns out that our current implementation here is not really what we want. Let me show you a diagram and help you understand. Okay, so this is essentially the component hierarchy that we have inside of our application right now, or at least just the text screen. So we've got our text screen, and it's showing a text input. I'm going to refer to this text input as input, just so I can stop saying the word text all the time and confuse you as to whether I'm talking about text screen or text input. So essentially, our text screen is showing a input. We can imagine right now that that input element has some state property tied to it. Maybe it's a piece of state called like current text, and when I type in ASDF, we can kind of imagine that that state turns to ASDF. Remember, state in React is used to track any variable that's going to change over time. And whenever that variable changes, we want our component to re-render. So I think it's really not out of the realm of possibility to say that this text element right here, that input element, has some internal state tied to it that at present we can't really see. Now, just so you know, in reality, the text input doesn't really have any state, but let's just imagine that for right now. So here's the issue. Here's where things start to get kind of awkward. What would happen if we wanted our text screen to somehow inspect the current value inside that text input? Well, that would encourage our parent element to kind of reach on down to a child and try to inspect some of the different properties that it currently has. So we can kind of imagine if the text screen wants to know what the current text input's value is, it might say, well, on the text screen, I'm going to go and see what my child is up to, and I'm going to pull its value of state out, and I'm going to make use of it somehow. So this is not what we want to do with React in like any regard ever. In no situation do we ever want to have a parent element reach down directly into a child and try to inspect that child's state or any data tied to it. There are some scenarios where that is permissible and it's something that we want to do, but it's extremely rare and it's definitely not really what we want to do around handling an input like this. So again, the problem with this scenario is that we don't want the parent to reach down and try to inspect some properties that this text input has. So instead, we're going to kind of do something. This is where, like I said, it's going to get a little bit weird. It's going to seem unnecessary, but it's a much more React way, so to speak, of approaching this problem. So here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to make sure that our text screen element is going to hold a piece of state that represents what is currently inside of that input. Then every single time that we render our text screen, we're going to show that input element and we're going to pass in two props to it. We're going to pass in a prop called value, and that's going to be equal to the current text that's inside of our piece of state right here. The text input is programmed to automatically receive a prop called value. If we pass in that prop and it is a string, the input is going to show that value directly on the screen. In other words, it's going to print out that value inside the text input. We can actually test that out right away very easily without even really worrying about having to add in state or anything like that. If we flip back over to our text input right away, I can add in a value prop right here, and I can put in any old value into it. Actually, let's do something different than my usual gibberish. I'll just say hi there like so. I can then save that, flip back over, and I see the text hi there appear. So again, if we put in a value prop, the text input is going to show that on the screen. So that's step one. The other thing that we're going to pass from our text screen down into the text input is a callback function under the prop name onChangeText. The text input is programmed to receive this prop. If we pass in a function under the prop name specifically onChangeText, that callback function will be invoked anytime a user types inside of that text input. So inside of that prop or the function we pass to it, we can provide a reference to our setter function and say essentially anytime a user changes the text inside there, we want to update our state variable inside of text screen. Remember what happens anytime we update a state variable? Anytime that happens, we're going to automatically have our text screen element re-rendered. That means that we're going to then re-show or re-render our text input as well. And at that point in time, we're going to pass down a new value on the value prop. It will be the updated text of whatever the user just entered in. So the reason this is weird, as I'm saying here, is that right now our text input is working just fine. It appears that we can write stuff in there and there's no issue whatsoever. But again, it all comes down to how we try to access the text inside there. With React, we do not have a parent reach down into a child element. Instead, if we ever want to communicate data from a child up to a parent, we have to use this callback system, where we pass a prop down, that's a callback function, and when something happens inside that child, it will call that callback and tell the parent that something just occurred. That's how we communicate from a child up to a parent. Okay, so let's now take a quick pause right here now that we understand more or less verbally what's going on here. When we come back in the next video, we're going to add in some code to make sure that we can actually track the current text inside that input using a state variable.